Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm in the Mount Vernon neighborhood at the corner of Charles and Reed Streets, just north of the Washington Monument. And we're going to talk about the building behind me, the Latrobe building. If you've been here in the last few months, you'll know it's now a fabulous new hotel with a wonderful bar, and we're going to get to that. But let's start our story 112 years ago, back in 1911. And that's when another wonderful building, one of the city's foremost townhouses, was demolished to make way for this then brand new apartment building. The townhouse was built by a gentleman named John Hazelhurst Bonneval Latrobe, one of those wonderful, almost over-the-top historic names. Latrobe was the son of Benjamin Latrobe. You may know that name. Benjamin Latrobe was maybe the country's first formally trained architect. He designed the wonderful basilica that we've got on Cathedral Street and was also the architect for the U.S. Capitol, although he kind of grumbled to Thomas Jefferson, who made him follow somebody else's plans, but that's another story. Our Latrobe, John Latrobe, was one of Baltimore's most prominent citizens. He was the chief lawyer for the B&O Railroad at a time when the B&O was experiencing explosive growth westward. Latrobe was the guy who negotiated all those land contracts to allow the B&O to build the bridges and lay the tracks. Latrobe was also, on the side, a patent lawyer and dabbled as an inventor. And in 1846, he patented a new stove that became known as the Latrobe stove, or the Baltimore heater. It eventually replaced the older stove that Benjamin Franklin had invented, the Franklin stove. And the funny thing, though, is that Latrobe kind of didn't want to be associated with this stove. He kept it on the QT. He was afraid that being the inventor of such a sort of commonplace object as a stove would tarnish his lofty legal reputation. Whatever, he was the inventor. And he was a citizen activist. He helped found the Maryland Historical Society, that we now know as the Maryland Center for History and Culture. And he helped found Druid Hill Park. On the national level, he helped found the American Bar Association. And if you're a literary fan, you will thank John Latrobe. He was one of 3 judges at a local literary competition that awarded a prize to a young Edgar Allan Poe for his essay, Manuscript in a Bottle, that was then published in the Baltimore Evening Sun and gave Poe his literary sort of launch. Latrobe was, for a number of years, I think almost 40 years, was the president of the American Colonization Society, a group that wanted black Americans to migrate to Africa. John Latrobe had a famous father. He also had a famous son, Ferdinand Latrobe, who was a mayor of Baltimore 7 times, got us through the Great Railroad Panic in the 1870s, among other things. And in fact, it was Ferdinand and his wife, Louisa Swan, who mostly lived in the house that was ultimately demolished. You may know the name Swan. It's etched above the archway, or on the archway on Madison Street, one of the original entrances to Druid Hill Park. Louisa's father, Thomas Swan, was the mayor that made Druid Hill Park happen. But in 1911, all of that changed. Ferdinand died, and a few months later, the neighboring family, another prominent family of Clinton Riggs, bought the house and then demolished it. They were excited to build a brand new 9-story apartment. It's not as cold-hearted as it sounds. They also demolished their own house. The 2 houses together made way for this apartment building. They, I guess, were eager to become real estate developers. When they went to hire an architect, they hired one of the most prominent firms, a firm called Glidden and Fritz. Glidden was the son of William Glidden from Cleveland, who gave us Glidden Paint Company that we still know today. Together, those 2, in addition to the Latrobe building, built a number of apartment buildings that you may know: Tudor Hall and Canterbury Hall in the Tuscany Canterbury neighborhood, and the Homewood that's now part of the Hopkins campus. Glidden, without Fritz, also designed the Marlborough Apartments, which I'm sure you'll know. That's where the Cohn sisters famously collected had the Picassos and Matisses and Monets that are now the core of the Impressionist collection at the BMA, as well as the Washington Place apartments right next to the Washington Monument, that apartment building that looks exactly like it should be in the middle of Paris. Fritz, incidentally, went on to design a number of other apartment buildings or a number of other buildings you may know. He helped design the Scottish Rite Temple on Charles Street and the Pratt Library's main branch that we know today. But in 1912, when this building opened, the Baltimore Sun raved about it. They called it, quote, the apartments are filled with many of the latest conveniences. They don't enumerate what those are. And then it curiously goes on, the Sun goes on to say that many of the quarters are especially designed for bachelors. It also doesn't say exactly what that means. Maybe in 1912, everybody knew what an apartment especially designed for bachelors was. Maybe it had a small kitchen. Maybe it didn't have any kitchen. I'm not 100% sure, but it had those. Over the years, the building went through a number of changes. It became medical offices along the way, and then in the 1970s, sort of half of it reverted back to apartments. And by the 1980s, it had become pretty much the hub for nonprofit organizations to have their headquarters. And then just a few months ago, it went through a radical, complete overhaul and emerged as the Hotel Ulysses. I think that our inventor, John H.B. Latrobe, would love the sparkle that it has. If you haven't been inside, I encourage you to go. I got to take a peek at some of the rooms as well as the bar and the breakfast room, and they are colorful and whimsical and fabulous. If you haven't been, it's worth a trip. Come on down. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.